Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. Tales from the Road, Volume 9. When people hear my wife's Russian, they imagine a tall blonde girl with a funny accent who wears heels for every grocery run. Reality couldn't be further from the stereotype. Lana is dark-haired, speaks better English than I do, and is completely obsessed with sneakers. She does not meet one stereotype, though she never gets cold, seeing how she lived in Russia until she was 18. Not in Moscow, of course. Did you know that Moscow's actually pretty warm? There are entire states in America where winters are far colder than anything Muscovites ever have to deal with. Now, my wife comes from a tiny town far up rushing north on the tundra, a dark, gloomy, and a very cold place inside the Arctic Circle, with extremely harsh winters and even harsher people. A place that meets the stereotypes. I've met my in-laws all of 2 times, including our wedding, both times as they traveled to the States. Frankly, I never had any intention of visiting my Lana's hometown until she got that fateful call 9 days ago. My mother-in-law had had a stroke. While her condition was stable for the time being, the local doctor expected the worst could happen at any minute. Transporting her to a better hospital was out of the question, as she was in no state for the kind of a journey that you'll see described below. My wife made travel arrangements immediately. I had a valid Russian visa for a business trip to Moscow a few weeks prior, so I decided to go with her. Now, getting to my wife's hometown isn't easy. You're in for a flight to Moscow, a connecting flight to Norilsk, one of the biggest cities in the Russian tundra. From there, it's an hour-long trip down the Yenisei River by barge in summer and on cars over ice in the winter. Urgently getting to Moscow wasn't that hard. There, however, we faced additional difficulties. First of all, apparently I couldn't actually fly to Norilsk with Lana, as the city was closed to foreigners. Before we could even process that, we were told that Norilsk airport was closed for all aircraft due to poor weather conditions, and the weather wasn't expected to improve that week. I tried to console Lana as best I could, but news of her mom getting worse drove her crazy. Soon Lana suggested an alternative. It was possible to fly to a city a fair bit south of Norilsk, which was safe from the storms. For a modest fee, a family friend living there was willing to take a day's journey up the ice road to Lana's hometown. Well, more like a night's journey, since according to him it was better to travel at night, by car's light, than by what passed as daylight. I told my wife she was insane. She, however, was adamant on her plan, saying she's done Zimnik, how Russians call their ice roads, many times with her dad, and it was perfectly safe. She wouldn't budge, no matter how I pleaded, and told me I was welcome to stay in Moscow. Obviously, that was not an option, and in the end I gave up. We flew to our next destination. The cold hit me as soon as I stepped out of the plane. It was a different kind of cold, invasive and ruthless, and it didn't care about layers of sweaters and socks I had on. I shivered, imagining how much colder it was going to get. We met with a trucker who was to take us up north. He called himself Kolya, and my wife's Veta, the Russian version of her name. Me, he didn't call at all, instead referring to me derisively as Mr. Amerikashka whenever he spoke to my wife. Lana told me with a chuckle she didn't tell Kolya I could understand Russian, although I don't think he would have cared. Kolya was supposed to be a few years younger than my wife, but looked much older, his skin and posture worn down by the harsh conditions of his homeland. He laughed at our American shoes and coats, and said he would pack extra jackets, woolen socks, and valenki for us just in case. His brother helped load his truck, which looked like it had seen the fall of the Soviet Union, and then Kolya sat down to enjoy a shot of vodka, one for the road. My wife saw me blanch at that. This isn't New York, or even Moscow. she said quietly. People here are a bit behind in terms of DUI. Don't worry, he won't drink enough to get impaired. He's seen that kill people on the road. Well, indeed, the first shot was the last, and Kolya hopped into the truck. He offered my wife the shotgun seat, which, as far as I understood, Russian macho culture was basically equivalent of throwing a glove in my face. Whatever, as long as it got us there. The road was a dark stretch of ice and packed snow, powdered by the fresh snow that had fallen that morning. Snowdrifts bordered both sides of the roads and leaked into its surface a fair bit. Otherwise, it was the same barren, flat surface for miles. In the first couple of hours, we saw a few cars going the opposite way to us. Then a car going in the same direction as us overtook us and disappeared in the darkness ahead at surprising speeds. It was a freaking tiny, rusted-through Subaru. I gave up on understanding Russians then and there. Shortly after the Subaru guy, it started snowing. Just a bit at first, then more and more. Kolya didn't seem bothered, and I tried to stay calm as well, which I managed mostly successfully until the wind joined in. Unlike the snow, it started hard from the get-go. Have you ever heard wind howling and become unsettled by the sound? Now I imagine the same, but in the depths of a black night lit only by your car's headlights. Except for your own vehicle, the world around is silent and devoid of life, frozen until the spring. Not that you can see much through the thick snow that is now the wind's plaything, flurrying around the car, blanketing the windows. Our pace slowed to a crawl, as Kolya swore colorfully in Russian. Maybe stop and wait it out, I suggested nervously. We can't, Lana said without bothering to ask our driver. If we stop, there's a good chance the car won't start up again, and we are stuck here waiting for someone to pick us up. And it's been empty today. The realization we were at a very real risk of freezing to death hit me like a ton of bricks. I leaned back into my seat and closed my eyes, wordlessly praying for the best. The only response was the wind howling, and it sounded so strange. It would start low and quiet and then get louder and louder until a yowling crescendo, then cut off abruptly, then start again, and the sound came from different directions, each starting at a different time, like a pack of wolves howling. I opened my eyes to obvious tension in the car. Lana and Kolya were both hunched forward, peering intently through the glass for all the good it did. Kolya glanced back at me. "Don't worry, be happy," Kolya proclaimed with a horrible Russian accent. "It is all okay. Don't worry, America." He was lying. I might have been useless on the ice road, but I was a criminal defense lawyer, and a good one at that, and Kolya was a bad liar. There was sweat beading on his face and neck, and his voice was forced. He was very much scared, and that made me scared, too. Kolya murmured something to my wife, too quick and quiet for my distracted mind to decipher. She nodded. "What was that?" "There's a village maybe half an hour up the road. If we keep this pace, we get there and settle down till the morning." "I see. Sorry about the delay." In reality, I was extremely happy to hear that. "Bad wind, huh?" Lana grabbed my hand, quick and sudden as a snake. "Don't mention the wind." Another sound came through the storm, a long, tinny wail that sent shivers down my spine. It took me a few moments to recognize the familiar sound of the wind whistling through walls and chimney, and then another moment to realize there were no fucking walls around for the wind to whistle. I opened my mouth to comment, and my wife's grip tightened on my arm. In that moment, I knew to keep it quiet. We drove in tension-filled silence as a cacophony of sounds erupted through the storm. Wails and shrieks, howls and cries. No way no fucking wind was producing all of that. The sounds grew closer, grew louder. I grabbed my wife's hand as we both stared desperately ahead. Through the flurry we barely made out something, a large dark shape reflecting our lights, or maybe piercing the darkness with lights of its own. Kolya swore and swerved to the side. We were passing another car, stuck in the snow. Its blinkers flashed. "Stop," Lana said, sudden and harsh. "What?" Kolya asked in Russian. "You insane?" "Stop," my wife repeated. "On the ice road, you help." That's the rule, remember? Kolya gave her a long, hard look that I didn't like at all. That's the rule on the road, he echoed, and hit the brakes, slowing the car without actually stopping. I opened the door and peered outside. The driver of the stuck vehicle was already running towards us. I recognized the car itself as the Subaru that passed us earlier. Thank God you people were... the driver began. Get in, idiot! Kolya shouted, and the guy shut up and jumped in. He was just a kid, no older than 20, with dark red hair and a patchy little beard. He looked cold and terrified. Thank God, he repeated in a hushed whisper. I was sure they'd get me. They? I asked, confused. Kolya and Lana turned to look at the kid in unison, and their looks could kill. They? Yeah, I mean, the wind and snow, the kid corrected quickly. I had a sudden abrupt feeling that it was too late for that, even as I still had no clue what was going on. We drove on, and the interplay of howls and shrieks outside the car became unbearable in the silence. What's your name, dude? I asked him in my best Russian. He blinked. Sergey. Sergey Molodochnov. My parents are... Anyway, it doesn't matter. I shouldn't have been driving, but I wanted to make it to my girlfriend's birthday and... Both of you, shut up! My wife barked, and we did. Immediately I noticed a change in surrounding sounds. They were much louder now. The highest-pitched shrieks rang in my ear. The low, insistent howling seemed to surround the car, and every now and then something that sounded like an actual roar cut through the night. The car picked up the pace. I looked at Kolya and realized he was absolutely flooring the gas pedal. Poor visibility be damned. His truck was lurching along as fast as it could manage in the conditions, and yet the encroaching racket made it obvious we were nowhere near fast enough. Then the car hit something. We were all jerked forward as the truck came to a staggering halt. I hit my temple hard on the back of my wife's seat. What was that? I groaned. Must have hit a chunk of ice or something. Lana's voice sounded strangely muffled. I remember focusing on her lips, and how pale and thin they looked. The dull, resounding pain in my head exploded into something hot and overwhelming, and I collapsed into the back seat. He's passed out, Sergey called out. I wanted to correct him, but my voice wouldn't obey me. My lids seemed to weigh a ton each. I could barely open my eyes enough to see the trio of Russians huddled together, the car's flickering light illuminating their pale faces. What now? Sergey asked nervously. Well, let's see. I don't think I would have been able to understand complex Russian in that state if it wasn't my Lana speaking, her voice so familiar down to airy inflection. Why don't you go out and check what we hit, and if we can clear it out somehow? What? We helped you, didn't we? In the car's light, Lana's green eyes seemed very blue. So why don't you help us back? After all, on the ice road you help each other. That's the rule. Kolya grumbled in agreement. Then he reached over and pulled out a rifle and aimed it at the boy. Sergey whimpered. You know they're out there. Well, Lana's voice was impeccably calm, cold. I guess you'd better not speak about them out loud. Better not even think about them, really. My eyes closed against my will. I heard a door swing open and a rush of cold air. Finally I passed out for real, and in my unconsciousness I dreamed of horrified screaming and a single terrible roar that filled the night. I came to during the day on a couch of some local family that agreed to house us for a bit of cash. My wife fussed over me. Once she was sure I was conscious and lucid, she rushed me into the car saying we could do the rest of the drive by day, and an actual doctor could look at me in her hometown. I settled in the back seat of the car. Vague memories haunted me. Where's the kid, Sergey? What kid, darling? Lana asked in sincere surprise. There was no kid. We traveled alone, Kolya added in Russian, and I wondered how he knew what I was asking about, or that I understood his answer. But aloud, I could only say, this young red-headed guy. Sweetie, I'm getting really worried. You must have hit your head harder than I thought. We gotta get you checked out as soon as we get back to the States. Maybe even a good checkup in Moscow? I didn't really know what to say after that. We made it the rest of the way uneventfully. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law had slipped into unconsciousness before we even set out for our drive, and she passed away several hours after our arrival. Lana didn't even get to say a proper goodbye. She's absolutely devastated right now, so I'm trying my best to focus on comforting her. We're staying here until the funeral, and I can't say I'm looking forward to the ride back. My father-in-law graciously gifted me a proper Russian winter coat, so I went ahead and packed my American camel coat that proved terribly insufficient for the weather. As I was folding it, I noticed a few curly red hairs stuck to the light beige fabric, and I felt so cold. Story number 2. I drive a truck for a living, big old tractor trailer. For a long while I worked with agencies to help me find freight, but after the wife died and all the truck payments were done, hallelujah, I decided to work independently. A couple of decades out on the road get you connections all over the place. If I'm stuck in Nevada and decide I'd rather be in Florida in the next couple of days and get paid for it, I've got a guy for that. I've got a guy that can get me just about anywhere. Honestly, and for a long time, that was good enough for me. I had already sold the house, and every penny that I wasn't spending on fuel was going straight into my pockets. As fate would have it, though, little guys like me started to disappear. Big agencies like Landstar were in bed with just about everyone, and all that cash I was sitting on started to dry up. In the trucking business, if you aren't making money, you are losing it. And boy, was I losing it. One day, I got a call from a buddy of mine that used to haul military loads out of Hill Air Force Base, saying that there were a couple weeks' worth of dedicated runs in Alabama that he figured I would be interested in. I didn't even bother asking him how much it was paying before I jumped on the job. I was at my pickup in Alabama the very next morning. I figured whatever the operation the shipper was running was pumping out loads 24/7, because when I arrived at 3 in the morning, the facility was already awake and noisy as hell. I backed up into the dock, and a thin Asian man that we will call Randy walks over to give me my paperwork. He looks flatly at me. I assumed that the facility must be a metal shop solely based on the symphony of industrial noises emanating from inside, but Randy didn't look the type. Slacks, gray button-up, tie, and polished brown shoes. There is no way that dude works in a metal shop. I rolled down my window and leaned out towards him, lighting a cigarette. "What are we hauling, boss man?" He signed the manifest, and I could see beads of sweat drip from his bald head onto the concrete loading yard. The sun was blistering that summer. I flicked on some shades and dragged on my cigarette. "Hey, bud, what are we hauling?" Randy looked annoyed. 964 pounds of recycled plastics. He handed me the bill. "You got any more in there? This trailer can run 42,000 pounds. 43 if I have to." I signed off the load and passed the sweat-stained paper back to him. 964 pounds. Plastics. Be at the drop-off listed on the manifest by tomorrow morning. Randy flicked out his phone and stabbed at the screen with his thumbs. "The address has been emailed to you." He pocketed the phone and walked off. Not another word out of him. It is at that moment that I decide that Randy is a prick. Loading is quick, and I got the okay to pull out. In my rear view, I got a glimpse into the building. I remember it so clearly. There was nothing. Nothing. Hell, the only person I could even see was Randy, who stood on the edge of the loading dock, arms crossed. It's weird. I understand that most people actually have no clue how the freight logistics industry work, but I'm sure any dum-dum would think the same thing that I did. That's fucking weird. 10 hours, 8 cigarettes, 2 Big Macs, and a handful of bathroom breaks later, I'm at the last turn of my trip. The drop-off location is supposedly down this little country road that looks like it goes to nowhere in particular. Oak trees started popping up here and there, as I headed down that lonely road. But before I knew it, the trees thickened, their gray roots cracked and warped the pavement so badly that it was almost impassable. After what seemed like an eternity of bumps and scrapes, the trees cleared, and I could see the vague shape of the drop-off facility in the glow of my headlights. Unlike the pickup, this place was dead. The whole thing was falling apart. It was so bad, in fact, that I called the reference number I had received just to confirm that I was, in fact, not at the correct location. To my delight, Randy picked up the phone. "What do you need?" he barked. "Hey, sorry, boss. I know it's late, but Mr. Freeman, what do you need?" He repeated with a sigh. I'm starting to get pissed. I've worked with guys like this before. Typically, a relationship doesn't last too long. I followed the GPS to the turnoff and followed it all the way to the end, just like the bill said. There's a pause. "Hello? Yes, and I'm parked outside of an abandoned factory or something. Windows busted out, door boarded up. It's a shit show. Where is the damn drop-off?" "You said you followed the GPS?" "Yes." "Then you took the turnoff and followed it all the way to the end?" "Yeah, that's the Then you are at the location, Mr. Freeman. Your drop isn't scheduled until 6 a.m. Good night." Click. It was at that moment that I decided that Randy was a prick again. After that lovely conversation, I just said screw it and went to bed. There was no point arguing, and I, as out of legal drive time on my clock anyway, I wasn't going anywhere. I did manage to find what could vaguely be considered a loading dock on the derelict estate and backed in. I was closing the blinds on the windshield, looking out into the empty woods and the mist crawling between the forest of oaks, and a shiver ran down my spine. Maybe it was just tension, but I spent that entire night trying to shake the feeling that something was watching me. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke to the sound of something banging on my driver's side door like it's trying to break off the whole damn thing. I whipped open the door and saw Randy standing there, clearly not amused. "What the hell, man? You trying to break my goddamn truck?" He didn't even flinch. "I've been knocking for," he glanced at his phone, 5 minutes on the dot, Mr. Freeman. We need you to leave the premises." "Leave the premises?" "I'm not going anywhere, bub, until I get unloaded and get my cash." I'm already crawling out of the truck, ready to beat the senses off his premises, but the sun is bright and crawling higher in the sky than expected. Randy reached behind him and pulled out a roll of cash. "It is 8:30, Mr. Freeman. Here is your pay, just as the bill stated." I plucked the money from his hand with the anxious twitch of a mouse stealing a meal from an unsprung trap. Tearing off the rubber band that held it together, I flicked through the wad of cash. It was all there. Randy's already walking away by the time I got done counting. "We will be reimbursing you for your fuel when you arrive at the pickup again." His heels clicked against the concrete as he walked back into the dock. I didn't even look in my mirror that time. As I left, a part of me was hoping that maybe he'd fallen under the tires and I would just... I couldn't explain it at the time, but I wasn't mad at Randy. I was scared, which is ridiculous. I should have been terrified. Most of the drive back is a daze. I was exhausted from the sleepless night before and from my interactions with Randy. I seriously considered just bouncing to Florida and forgetting the whole ordeal. But the money was too good. I was practically falling asleep at the wheel, which isn't common. Truckers learn all these tricks to stay awake when on long hauls. Our lives depend on it, and so do yours. We are 70,000-pound wrecking balls on wheels pumped full of flammable liquids and plated in steel. Any driver that considers themselves anything but a lethal weapon has no business being in a truck. Even with that being said, no driver is immune to road hypnosis. You need to be careful watching that dotted line, because sooner or later you'll get lost in them. White, black, white, black, white, black, white, black. I blinked, and I was at the pickup. It's night already, but the facility was still open, booming even. The screams of industrial saws and presses pealed through the air. The bay doors to the dock areas were closed, though, and I couldn't see inside. I parked in the same place as before and lit a cigarette. The nicotine started crawling through my veins, pushing out the fatigue. Every once in a while, someone emerged from the shop to smoke as well. I watched them like animals behind glass at the zoo, until another comes out, shared his lighter, and looked up at me. Somehow, they are no longer the animals. I'm the one trapped in a cage, behind glass. I'm the one trained to perform little tricks with a promise of a treat if I do it right. I can do 4,500 if you can get this to Oregon before the end of the week. I stepped out of the truck, asserting my humanity. Throwing an unlit cig in my mouth, I wave. Howdy. You guys got a light and a lung? 'Cause both of mine are bad. They didn't laugh. But in their defense, I'm not very funny. Light? The first one, a middle-aged Hispanic man, passed me a Zippo with SeaWorld logo on it and the name Jesse engraved in the back. The second one wordlessly retreated back inside. SeaWorld, I light up. I used to take my grandkid out there before all that documentary stuff came out. Amazing how one person can spoil everyone else's fun. He looked at me and nodded, exhaling thick fumes that smelled like clove. Yeah. You still go? He flicked some ash onto the building behind him. Not much anymore. Kids are out of the house and the wife saw that movie too. The man chuckled to himself and pulled out another cigarillo from the breast pocket of his button-down. I still think it's kind of cool. He looked my way and I nodded back at him, flicking the Zippo open and striking its tiny wick. Once his tobacco was lit, he filled up his lungs with the fragrant smoke. You know, fish and shit. Yeah, fish. I clicked the lighter closed and it spun in my fingers. We stood there in silence for a good while longer than I was comfortable with, listening to the crickets chatter away at one another. So, what are you guys shipping out of here? Seems like this place is always pretty busy. He tamped the cigarillo against the wall and put it back in his pocket. Gotta go, break's over. The man practically ran back inside and slammed the door behind him. I grabbed the handle and jiggled it, but it was locked. Looking around, I saw a sun-bleached plastic buzzer fixed to the brick beside the door, and I rung it. Hello? Buzzed the box. Yeah, one of your guys left his lighter out here. Silence. Hey, can I at least come in and take a leak? I could hear room ambiance for a beat before the box spoke up. This is a secure facility. Were you given a badge? Badge? No. I'm just picking up your freight. I was here yesterday. Only authorized personnel are allowed in the facility, it croaked. I sighed. Are you serious right now? I just have to piss. Authorized personnel only. There's a part of me that wanted to just barge in there, but I didn't. It's not worth it. I walked around the truck and pissed in the bushes like an animal. The moment isn't lost on me. I was finishing things up, feeling lower than low, and just as I was about to hunker down for the night in the rig, I noticed something. A dent. Not a huge one, mind you, but I know every inch of my rig. When there is a dent, I see it, but I usually don't do much about it. Dents happen. Dents from the outside happen. This dent was made on the inside. Great. I figured that the jackasses unloading must have clipped the inside with a forklift or something. This kind of stuff is always a hassle. I can just hear, how do you know it wasn't there before already? As much as I just want to ignore it and let sleeping dogs lie, this dog wouldn't catch a wink knowing that there was a dent of unknown origin in his trailer. I decided to take a quick peek. I threw open the doors to the trailer and hoisted myself inside. Using the light of my phone, I combed the empty trailer with long sweeps of illumination until I get to the end. As expected, the telltale scrapes of a forklift scar the entire length of the deformation. Other than that, everything was as it should be. I wasn't going to start barking over a scuff. The shoe is a completely different matter, though. Back, all the way in the corner, lay a single dirty navy blue Chuck Taylor. I trained my phone's flashlight toward the offending article and paced my way to the corner. I crouched down and flipped over the canvas tongue. Size 4. Upon closer viewing, the shoe appeared to be relatively new and in good condition, despite the dried muck that covered it. It looked like some kid walked them right out of the shoe store and into a creek bed. It's funny how something so innocuous, a stray sneaker, can make you feel so much confusion. How does something like that get there? It doesn't. It doesn't just get there. It had to be placed there or forgotten there. Tried not to think about the possibility of sinister implications. I didn't do anything. I didn't put it there. There's only one thing that can really be known for certain in this particular situation. Someone is missing a shoe. That's simple. No need to panic. No need to race through the mind with why questions. I just calmly fetched another cigarette, calmly took out my new SeaWorld lighter and calmly struck the flint. Then I calmly struck it again and again, calmly of course. I calmly realized that it's not going to light, and calmly I closed up my truck after calmly placing the small shoe in my pocket. I calmly climbed into the cab. I calmly fished out my old light. Then I chain smoked until the witching hour. When I was out of cigs, I fell asleep thinking about walking to the nearby gas station to buy some more. I woke up in the morning, a string of drool leading from my lips to a puddle on the dash. Squinting through the curtains hung over my driver's side window, I see Randy already walking up, staring at me behind a pair of blue reflective sunglasses. To avoid the annoyance of him beating down my door, I open the shades and roll down the window. His stride is consistent as he walks up the couple of stairs leading to my door. 402 pounds, plastic, he said as he handed off the bill. Same drop? I asked, signing my name and passing his copy back to him. Same drop. I saw a couple of pickup trucks in the parking lot, man. You really don't need a whole rig to carry 400 pounds. I'm getting irritated, but I'm not sure why. Randy set me on pins. I'll take the cash. It just seems overkill is all. Randy left without another word, and something in my skull started to itch. I don't bother trying to talk to anyone loading me up. Heck, I don't even leave the truck. The whole ordeal seemed like it wasn't worth the trouble anymore. But that's the most ridiculous part. There hadn't been any trouble. Other than the confusion with the drop-off point, things were smooth sailing. Yes, Randy's a prick, but so are 90% of the other foremen that I had worked with. Maybe things were just going too smoothly. I heard my door shut, and a Hispanic man who I didn't recognize gave me a thumbs up and waved me off. He looked exhausted and frail, sickly even. That's when I noticed the blue and off-yellow spattering of bruises running the length of both of his arms. I would have asked if he was all right, but I had pulled off. When I looked back, I could only see his boots as they slowly disappeared behind the meticulously closed bay door. I decided then that this would be my last delivery for, I didn't even know the name. Using my knee to steer, it's a bad habit. Don't write me, I already know. I reached into the glove box and pulled out both bills. With a quick scan, I noticed that the names in the box for shipper are in fact different. The sweat-stained one from the day before read, Universal Solutions, Inc., and the one for today's read, Clayton's Recycling. Once before, I'd shipped a load of furniture across state lines. It's the kind of run that you do more of as a favor than a moneymaker. I was a little more than a day into the drive when I got pulled over by an unmarked police car. The younger me was sweating bullets, worried about getting any more points on my license, but he never would have expected that I was a meth mule. Yep. In the cushions, after a couple of months of interrogations and court dates, things settled down, but I never forgot the shame of being cuffed and put in a cruiser. I'd never been arrested before or since. I made sure of that. Something about driving this load, though, felt a lot like how I'd felt when they ripped out that first wrap of meth. I pulled a tiny dusty shoe from my pocket, carefully nested in the pile of fuel receipts on the dash. The drive to the drop was as uneventful as the first. Alabama had these long country roads that go like the ones out in the Midwest, but the South has a lot to look at. Cows and fields of corn and wheat, mostly, and the truck stops are nice. They're lonely, but that isn't always a bad thing. Today it was a bad thing. I was developing an unshakable sense of paranoia and desperately wanted human contact. Before the pull-off, I parked at a truck stop just to see another living soul. There, I bought a package of sour gummy worms and a Coke from a pimple-faced teen no older than 18. Really been a scorcher here recently, I say, leaning over the counter to pull out my wallet. Yeah, it's been hot, he replied flatly, pulled out his phone and started typing a text message. You been working here long? He was glued to his cell phone, tapping on the register for my change without even looking. The register popped open, and he dug around in the well for coins before passing them off to me. 73 cents is your change. Thanks. You been working here very long, boss? I took the cash. No. He put down his phone and shot me a glazed expression that said, My parents don't understand me, and my favorite band is pretty obscure. Do you need anything else, sir? I guess not. I spit out, defeated. I exited the stop and passed up my truck, and I stared at the plastic security seal that tied my doors together. A part of me wanted to break it and look inside. A part of me wanted not to feel so goddamn freaked out all the time. I wondered if I should go back on medication. I've been wondering that a lot since I started hauling this freight. Odd waves of dread pulsed through me like cold, dead blood, and before I know it, I was back at the wheel, heading down the same lonely highway, away from that same lonely truck stop. The sun was setting around that time, shading the cow pastures in hues of purple and orange. A pack of brown horses sprung to life when they saw me and dashed on the other side of the fence, daring me to race them. My dad helped breed horses with a business partner out in Clovetown, Kentucky when I was a kid. I spent a lot of time with my mom in the years after they split, but getting to see my dad was always a treat. I'd wake up with him and lay down some feed. Once I even watched the birth. At the time it terrified me. Now though I look back at it with a lot of nostalgia. I remember it was just kind of falling out into the dirt, covered in blood and all kinds of mess. Honestly, I thought it was dead because it didn't move for so long. Maybe that's what scared me. Something dying before you even had a chance to live. I tried to run away and cry. I remember crying a lot back then. But my dad grabbed me by the shoulder and told me to keep watching. I'm glad he did. Like magic, the foal shot up to its knobby, jittery legs. It was clumsy magic for sure, but even now I'm hard-pressed to remember anything else that filled me with such a cocktail of different emotions. The horses slowed their pace, and I spotted a kid playing on a rope swing tied to a dead sycamore tree behind a whitewashed plantation home. Soon the back porch light would blink, and he would run inside for dinner. His dad would tell him all the chores he neglected that day. He would apologize and sneak cookies into bed. Through his open window he would whisper to the stars and tell them all the things he'll do when he's older. He'll tell them how much he wants to be like his father, and how his horse will be in the Kentucky Derby. His eyes will hang heavy on his face as he reads himself the bedtime story of his future. The stars wink goodbye with flashes of light already hours old. White, black, white, black, white, black. The shattered, jagged glass teeth of the broken window smiled at me from the drop-off point. The rogue wind battered my trailer, warning of an oncoming storm that was already spitting droplets of rain on my windshield. I decided that when I was done with this drop, I was going back on my meds. I backed up to the bay doors, focusing on its reflection in my side mirrors. The truck beeped rhythmically, warning anyone that might be behind me to make way. Then another gust of wind ripped through the air and yanked my mirror so fast that it collided into my window. There was a staccato crunch as a web of fractures split through the glass. The sharp chunks spilled from the door and crashed on the concrete below. Some pieces blew into the cab, carried another breeze, and I felt a shard slice my palm as I shielded my face. Shit. I popped open the door and precariously stepped out. Glass crunched under my boot as I landed on the first step. The mess scattered all over the yard, sitting in fresh puddles forming from the downpour of rain. I looked at my hand to find a scarlet stream flowing from a gash that stretched the entire length of my palm. Shit! Shit! I don't like blood. I try to ignore it, but it's there. I know it's there. I was focusing on trying not to think about something so hard. Really? I'm getting nauseous at that point, and I dashed for the door of the complex. It's locked. Of course it's locked. The windows, however, were very unlocked. In fact, they were wide open. I was panicked. The last thing I was worried about was trespassing laws. And it was an emergency after all, right? I crawled through the sill, careful not to further injure myself. The facility had a factory floor layout and was, as one would assume, very dark. Again, I used my phone to light my way as I searched for a bathroom of some kind. I was wandering in near pitch darkness and found it almost impossible to determine what the building could possibly be used for. There was no equipment save for a couple of old trucks stashed away in one corner. There was an office room that had been sectioned off from the rest of the shop, but I could easily peer inside it through two large windows that had been strategically installed to look out on the largest portion of the shop floor. Seconds away from falling into a panic, I found the blue door marked bathroom in permanent marker. I threw myself inside and immediately hung a left to the closet sink. The water is freezing cold when I turned the spigot, but it did the job in washing out my wound. An immediate sense of relief washed over me as the water washed away the blood, and I inspected the cut. It was long but shallow, and I gave myself a deserved chuckle and stared into the mirror. You're too old for all of this, I tell the reflection. I smiled back. Fishing around the darkness of the bathroom, I found a nearly empty paper towel dispenser and something I couldn't recognize at first. I began to rub up my hand as I inspected what appeared to be a series of black poles with small plastic platforms on top. It's a camera tripod. Under it lie a charger for, I assume, a camera battery. I inspected the tripod when I accidentally bumped my phone that had been resting face down on the edge of the sink to provide a little light. I tried to catch it, but it wound up smacking midair. The phone clashed with the dirty tile floor and slid under one of the stalls. Heading into the stall, I noticed a second light for the first time. A grim realization settled in my gut, like a summer fog over a valley. A cheap digital camera, locked on top of an identical tripod, was erected in front of me, the lens facing where a toilet would have normally been. The plumbing had been gutted, though, and the wall had been demolished to lengthen the stall by a couple of yards. At the far end, directly in view of the recording device, was a rusted metal chair. The legs had been screwed into the ground with a series of metal brackets, and cuff-like fixtures were installed where someone's leg would naturally fall. I felt sick. I retrieved my phone and dared to venture a peek at the camera screen. In the top left corner, the symbol of a battery blinked red to alert its dwindling charge. Somehow, through the night vision screen, the chair seemed so much more sinister. Its image flashed with a blinking infrared light being cast from the front of the device. I pulled myself closer to the mesmerizing terror of its image and noticed something luminous in the corner. A specter hiding in phantasmal plane. I pulled my gaze from the camera and shone my phone light towards the chair. Tucked away in a messy pile behind the seat is a wad of clothes with a single discarded sneaker peeking its toe out from underneath. I nearly knocked over the camera trying to scramble away. The blood rushing through my ears sounded like war drums. I darted to the next stall and slammed it open. Another camera, dead this time, was facing yet another chair. A tiny, blood-soaked hoodie lay underneath the tripod. The stall next to it was even worse. God, I have spent so many nights trying to forget it. I would give anything to erase the entire ordeal from my memory, but I can't. Trying not to think of something you already know is so hard. Impossible, really. Just like that tiny pair of pants and soiled underwear were so impossibly small, so fragile. A pack of off-brand prophylactic contents were spilled on the ground. I ran so fast after that, running from the sight as if fleeing fast enough would somehow leave that image behind instead of forever, burning itself in my thoughts. I could taste stomach acid in my mouth. The factory spun circles in my head and threatened to cave in on me. Then my legs gave out. I fell hard into the dust of the shop floor and dove into my pockets with trembling hands to recover a cigarette. I threw it in between my teeth. I stared cross-eyed at the tip of the cig and flicked the Zippo from my breast pocket. Ch, ch, ch. Nothing. The rain was coming down in buckets by that time, and lightning sent pealing screams of thunder through the air. I could feel my head swim as I tried to anchor myself there, staring out the frame of the shop's broken window. My truck rests there, still running. Raindrops pelted into the trailer like liquid bullets, and the clatter of hail punctuates the ambiance. From there I can see the plastic security seal, unbroken, no doubt holding back a horror that few people would even conjure in their most inhuman nightmares. Shh, shh, shh. The lighter's bone dry and sends out taunting sparks into the air. I stood to my feet and leaned against the ancient steel cargo container to my left. I can feel something rustling inside that rusted womb. In the stillness, in that chamber of atrocities, I wonder which abomination is greater, one who conceives evil or one who delivers it into the world. 402 pounds.